They said they had nothing left, that after my dad's early retirement and the cost of keeping up the house in Oakville, there was simply no room. That's what my mother told me, word for word, sitting across from me at their kitchen table 3 years ago, while my daughter Maya sat in a hospital bed at McMaster Children's Hospital, with a feeding tube, and a diagnosis that had taken 8 months to get. She was 6 years old. She weighed 31 pounds. I'm not going to make you sit through every detail of what those months looked like, because some things I still can't say out loud without my hands shaking. But I'll tell you the number. The number that my parents looked at, nodded slowly at, and then told me they simply could not help with. $44,000. That was what we needed, not for the surgery itself, which was covered under OHIP, but for the specialized nutritional therapy program at a private clinic in Toronto that her GI specialist had referred us to. It was the only program in Ontario with a pediatric team trained in her specific condition. The waitlist for the public option was 14 to 18 months. Maya's doctor told us, very quietly, that she did not have 14 months. My husband Daniel and I had already emptied our TFSA. We had sold his truck. I had picked up night shifts at the pharmacy where I worked as a technician, running on 4 hours of sleep and gas station coffee. We had raised just under $19,000 through a GoFundMe that our friends, our neighbors, people from our church in Hamilton, and complete strangers on the internet had contributed to. People who had never met my daughter sent $20 with notes that said, "Praying for your little one and stay strong, Mama." We were still $25,000 short. So I called my mother, and then I drove to Oakville and sat at that kitchen table and I asked them. My father didn't say much. He stirred his coffee and looked at the window and let my mother do the talking, the way he always had. She said they were on a fixed income. She said their investments had taken a hit. She said they wished they could do more, but their hands were tied, and she reached across the table and patted mine, and I sat there and I nodded, and I drove home, and I cried the entire way on the QEW. My brother Liam did not come to that meeting. He was busy, my mother said. He sent a text that night that said, "Thinking of you guys, hope things look up soon," with a sun emoji, and I didn't respond. We found the money eventually. A fundraiser organized by Maya's kindergarten class, a personal loan from Daniel's parents in Sudbury, and a medical hardship grant through a foundation I had stayed up until 2 in the morning filling out applications for. Maya started the program in March. By June, she had gained 9 pounds. By her 7th birthday, she blew out the candles on her cake and ate 2 pieces, and my mother-in-law filmed it on her phone, and we all cried in the backyard in a way that felt like putting something down that had been very heavy, for a very long time. My parents came to the birthday party. They brought a gift bag from Indigo and hugged Maya and took a photo with her, and my mother said she looked wonderful. I smiled and refilled people's drinks, and I did not say what I was thinking. Life moved forward the way it does. Maya is 9 now. She sees her GI team every 6 months. She's doing beautifully. She plays rep soccer and has opinions about everything and argues with me about screen time, and I am so grateful for every exhausting second of it. Last spring, my brother Liam got married. The wedding was at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake. It was beautiful, genuinely. His wife Claire is lovely, and I stood in the receiving line and hugged them both, and meant it. At the reception, my mother gave a toast that made the room laugh and cry in all the right places, and my father danced, which he almost never does, and I drank my wine and watched and thought, this is fine. This is good. We are okay. And then 3 weeks after the wedding, I was at my parents' house for Sunday dinner, and I was helping my mother clear the table, and she mentioned, very casually, the way you mentioned the weather, that they had given Liam and Claire a gift. I asked what kind of gift. She said they had helped with the down payment on the house. I asked how much. She paused. She was rinsing a plate, and she didn't turn around, and she said, $90,000. I put down the dish I was holding very carefully, because I did not trust myself not to drop it. $90,000. $44,000 had been too much. $44,000 to keep my 6-year-old daughter alive had been impossible, had been beyond reach, had been something they wished they could help with, but their hands were tied. $90,000 for a down payment, on a house in Burlington, for my brother and his wife, who both had jobs and no children, and no medical crisis, was, apparently, just fine. I didn't say anything that night. I drove home, and I told Daniel, and he went very quiet in the way he does when he's trying to decide if he's angry or just stunned. We sat at the kitchen counter for a long time, and didn't say much. I want to be honest about the next few months, because I think it matters. I didn't confront them. I know that probably sounds strange. But I had spent 3 years rebuilding something in myself that had cracked during the worst of Maya's illness, and I was not willing to blow it apart over a conversation I wasn't ready to have. So I kept going to Sunday dinners. I kept being polite. I helped my mother plant her garden in May, and I took Maya to her soccer games, and I breathed. But I also stopped pretending, inside my own head, that what they had done was anything other than what it was. They had chosen. When it was Liam, the answer was yes. When it was me, when it was Maya, the answer was no. And I had needed to believe for 3 years that it was circumstances, that it was truly about money, that there was no other explanation because the other explanation was too ugly to live with. Now I knew. And I couldn't unknow it. My relationship with my brother had always been complicated. Liam is 4 years older than me, and he has always been the easier child, the one who didn't ask hard questions, or push back, or choose a career path my parents didn't fully understand. He became a project manager at a construction firm in Mississauga. He bought a car my father approved of. He called my mother every Sunday, without being reminded. I love him. I do. But I had also spent most of my adult life noticing the way the room shifted when he walked in, and choosing not to examine it too closely. After I found out about the $90,000, I examined it. Autumn came. Maya started grade 4. I turned 33 in October, and my parents took us for dinner at a restaurant in Hamilton, and my mother ordered champagne, and I smiled and thanked them, and thought about $44,000 every time I looked at her. Face. In November, Liam called me. He didn't call often, so I knew before I answered that something was off. His voice had a quality to it I hadn't heard before, something careful and compressed, like he was speaking from inside a very small space. He said he needed to talk to me. He said it was important. We met for coffee at a Tim Hortons near his office, because he said he didn't want to meet somewhere Claire might come by, and that alone told me enough. He sat down across from me, and he looked exhausted and older, and I waited. He told me that the business his father-in-law had brought him into a side investment, nothing to do with his main job, something Claire had encouraged, and their parents had apparently known about, had collapsed. I didn't understand all the details. Something about a real estate development in Barrie that had been overextended, permits that fell through, investors pulling out. The short version was that Liam and Claire had lost a significant amount of money. Not their whole savings, but enough that they were in trouble. The mortgage on the Burlington house was manageable, but only barely, and there was a line of credit they had taken out for the investment that was now sitting there like something that needed to be dealt with immediately. He said he needed to borrow money. He looked at me when he said it, and I could see that he knew that some part of him had already done the math on what he was asking, and from whom. I took a long sip of my coffee. I asked him how much. He said $30,000. I sat with that number for a moment. I thought about a feeding tube. I thought about a hospital room with a window that looked out onto a parking garage. I thought about driving home on the QEW at night, crying so hard I had to pull over in Burlington, which is, as it happens, where Liam now owns a house that my parents helped buy. I did not say any of that. I asked him if he'd spoken to my parents. He looked down at his coffee cup and said they didn't have it right now. I asked what that meant. He said they had already given a lot, with the down payment, and he didn't feel right asking for more. Something moved through me then, that I'm still not sure I have a name for. It wasn't satisfaction, exactly. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter and older, like finally seeing the shape of a room you'd been standing in for years, without any lights on. I told him I needed some time to think. He nodded. He said he understood. He looked relieved, I think, that I hadn't said no immediately, and I watched him carry that small relief back to his car and I sat in the Tim Hortons for another 40 minutes by myself, just thinking. Here is what I thought about. I thought about the people who had donated to our GoFundMe. The woman from Stony Creek who sent $40 and wrote that she had a granddaughter the same age as Maya and that she would pray for her every day. The family from our street who organized a pasta dinner fundraiser and raised $3,000 in one night at a church hall that smelled like coffee and folding tables and community in the most genuine sense of that word. Daniel's parent, who had taken out a personal loan at 64 years old to help save their granddaughter, and who had never once mentioned it since. I thought about my parents sitting at their kitchen table in Oakville, telling me their hands were tied. I thought about Liam and his sun emoji. And then I thought about who I wanted to be. Not in a performative way. Not in a way that was about how it would look or what anyone would say. Just, who do I actually want to be? In the room where no one is watching. I did not give Liam $30,000. I want to be clear about that. I did not have $30,000 to give, and even if I had, I don't think I could have handed it over and remained in one piece. That might make me a lesser person than the woman in the story you might have expected. I think I can live with that. But I also did not hang up on him. I did not say the things that had been sitting in my chest since that night at the kitchen table with my mother and the dish I'd had to set down carefully. What I did was this. I called him back 2 days later. I told him I couldn't lend him the money. I told him why. I said it plainly, and without cruelty, and I did not cry, which I had practiced for, standing in my kitchen the night before, with Daniel sitting at the table watching me the way he does when he's being very careful with me. I told Liam that 3 years ago, when Maya was sick, I had asked our parents for $44,000, and they had told me they didn't have it. I told him I had found out last spring that they had given him $90,000 for his down payment. I told him I was not angry at him for receiving that was not his choice to make. But I needed him to understand that I was not in a position, financially or otherwise, to be the next source of emergency funding for a family that had not extended that to me when my daughter's life was on the line. There was a long silence. He said he didn't know. About the $44,000. About what we had been through. About how close it had actually been. He said my mother had told him Maya's situation had been covered by insurance. I closed my eyes. I told him it had not been covered by insurance. Another silence. And then something shifted in his voice, something I hadn't expected, which was that he sounded genuinely devastated, not defensive, not making excuses, just gutted. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know what else to say, but he was sorry. I believe him. I think that matters to say. What happened after that was slow and imperfect and ongoing. Liam and Claire negotiated a repayment plan for the line of credit through their bank, which took time and was stressful, and did not have a clean resolution. I can summarize neatly for you. My parents eventually found out that I knew about the $90,000. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening, and the conversation was difficult, and she cried, and I was honest in a way I hadn't been in 3 years. And it was not a fight, but it was not comfortable either. My father sent me an email, which is how he handles things he doesn't know how to say out loud, and it was 3 paragraphs, and it was more than I expected from him, and I read it 4 times. We are not repaired. I want to be honest about that too, because I think there is a version of this story that wraps up with a lesson and a hug, and everybody understanding each other, and that is not where we are. What we are is in the slow, unglamorous work of figuring out what kind of family we want to be going forward, with the full knowledge of what was chosen and what wasn't. Liam and I talk more now than we ever did before. That is genuinely true and genuinely surprising. He came to Maya's soccer tournament in September and sat in a camping chair next to Daniel in the rain and cheered so loud she could hear him from the field. Afterward, she told me her uncle was kind of embarrassing, and I said yes, he is, and I meant it completely as a compliment. I still go to Sunday dinners in Oakville sometimes. Not every week. My mother and I are finding a new register with each other, one that requires more honesty from both of us and less performance. It is harder, and I think it will eventually be better. What I know for certain, the thing I want to leave you with, is this. The moment I stopped trying to make the facts of what happened fit a story where my parents were simply unlucky, and circumstances were simply hard. That was the moment I started being able to breathe again. Not because the truth was easier. The truth was not easier. But it was solid in a way the other version had never been, and I needed something solid to stand on. Maya does not know most of this. She is 9. She knows that she was sick and that she got better and that a lot of people loved her through it. That is what she needs to know right now. Someday, when she's older, maybe I'll tell her the rest. I'll tell her about the GoFundMe and the pasta dinner, and Daniel's parents and the woman from Stony Creek who prayed for her every night. I'll tell her that strangers showed up for her, in ways that the people who were supposed to, didn't. And I'll tell her that that is not the end of a story, it's just information about the world, and what you do with it is yours to decide. She'll probably argue with me about it. She argues with me about everything. I am so grateful I get to hear it.